The moment the transmission flickered across the quantum relay, Dr. René Valdez knew something was fundamentally wrong. Nestled deep within the Olympus Research Station, a gleaming outpost perched at the edge of humanity's known solar boundary, Valdez watched the incoming signal with a mixture of professional detachment and growing unease. The quantum encryption was unlike anything she'd encountered in her 17 years of deep space communication research. Outside the station's reinforced windows, the infinite blackness of space seemed to press closer, as if listening. The first fragments of the message defied translation. Harmonic resonances that seemed to vibrate at the very edge of human perception mixed with mathematical sequences that appeared to dance between pure logic and something eerily sentient. Valdez's neural link interface began to pulse with warning indicators, system after system struggling to make sense of the incoming data. Dr. Valdez, called out Martinez, her senior communication specialist, "You're going to want to see this." The main holographic display erupted with a cascade of symbols. Not text. Not language. Something deeper. Patterns that seemed to carry weight, meaning beyond mere communication. Each symbol carried what felt like an emotional resonance, fear, respect, and an underlying current of grave warning. Preliminary scans suggested the transmission originated from beyond the Orion Arm, from a region of space so distant that light would take millennia to traverse the distance. Yet here was a message, compressed into a quantum packet that defied every known law of information transfer. Martinez's voice cracked. "It's repeating. But each repetition is different." Valdez leaned closer. The symbols began to coalesce, forming a pattern that was simultaneously a mathematical equation, a biological diagram, and something that looked disturbingly like a threat assessment. At its core was a recurring theme: humanity. Not as an observation. Not as a description. But as a problem to be evaluated. A problem that seemed to oscillate between profound potential and absolute danger. The last fragment of the transmission carried a chilling note, a series of coordinates that seemed to point directly at Earth, accompanied by a sequence that translated to something between a warning and a grudging acknowledgement. "We see you," the message seemed to say. "And we are afraid of what you might become." Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the transmission dissolved. The quantum relay went silent, leaving behind nothing but a series of cryptic data points and a growing sense of impending revelation. Dr. Valdez understood one thing with absolute clarity: humanity had just received a message from something far beyond their comprehension. And this was only the beginning. The galactic archives of Concordia were not meant for human eyes. A repository of millennia of interstellar knowledge, the crystalline data chambers held the collective wisdom of civilizations that had risen and fallen long before humanity had learned to kindle its first fire. Dr. Leonard Kimura adjusted his quantum interface visor, his hands trembling slightly as he accessed the restricted files recovered from the mysterious transmission. As the lead xenoarchaeologist for the Interstellar Historical Commission, he had spent decades piecing together fragments of galactic history. But this was different. The first file materialized around him, a holographic reconstruction of an encounter that had been deliberately buried in the deepest archives. It showed a moment of first contact between humans and the Zrelka, a highly advanced silicon-based civilization that had once dominated the Carina Arm. The encounter was brief. A human exploration vessel, barely more advanced than a deep space research probe, had encountered a Zrelkan diplomatic ship near the outer reaches of the Kepler system. What should have been a routine diplomatic exchange turned into something else entirely. The Zrelkan records were clinical, yet beneath the objective language, Kimura detected something unprecedented: fear. Human vessel designation, ISS Horizon. Encounter duration, 17 standard minutes, the archival log read. Anomalous behavioral patterns observed. Recommendation: maximum threat assessment. Kimura zoomed in on the detailed report. The human crew, when confronted with a technologically superior alien vessel, had not responded with submission or terror. Instead, They had displayed a combination of curiosity, adaptability, and an almost predatory problem-solving approach that defied all known first-contact protocols. The Zrelkan ship had attempted to initiate standard communication protocols. The humans had not only intercepted these communications but had begun to deconstruct and partially replicate the alien communication system within minutes. More frighteningly, they had then used that partially understood system to send back a message, not of aggression, but of an almost playful intellectual challenge. Another file flickered to life. This one documented an encounter between humans and the Korvax, a collective consciousness that had ruled a significant portion of the Sagittarius Arm for over 3 millennia. The encounter was brief but telling. A human diplomatic team had been invited to negotiate a trade agreement. Instead of following expected diplomatic procedures, the human representatives had identified a critical flaw in the Korvax's economic model, a flaw that had gone unnoticed for centuries. They presented this discovery not as a threat, but as an opportunity for mutual growth. The Korvax collective had been simultaneously impressed and terrified. Observation: one archived entry read, "Humans do not merely adapt. They transform." Every encounter becomes an opportunity for radical reimagination. Kimura's visor began to overheat from the data processing. He was seeing a pattern that no previous xenohistorian had recognized. Humans were not just another species. They were something else entirely, a species that didn't just survive, but fundamentally altered the environments and systems they encountered. The final file was the most disturbing. A comparative analysis of technological and cultural development across known galactic civilizations. Humans stood alone, a species that had gone from basic technological understanding to quantum communication in a fraction of the time it had taken other civilizations. And underlying every record was a consistent theme: unpredictability. As the holographic files began to fade, Dr. Kimura understood why the transmission had been sent. It wasn't just a warning. It was a recognition. Humanity was coming. And nothing would remain the same. The quantum cascade was approaching faster than anyone had predicted. A cosmic phenomenon that devoured entire star systems, it had already consumed 3 inhabited sectors of the Orion Arm. Civilizations that had existed for millennia were reduced to atomic dust in milliseconds, their entire histories erased as if they had never existed. At the Global Cosmic Defense Center in New Geneva, the mood was a razor's edge between desperation and determination. Dr. René Valdez stood before a holographic display that showed the cascade's progression. A wall of absolute destruction, consuming spacetime itself, moving with a mathematical precision that defied conventional physics. Traditional defensive technologies, energy shields, quantum dispersal fields, gravitational barriers, had proven utterly useless. "We have 72 hours, announced General Yaron Lovu, her voice cutting through the tense silence of the command center. 72 hours before the cascade reaches the outer solar system. The room was a United Nations of scientific and military minds, representatives from every corner of human civilization. Physicists from Beijing worked alongside engineers from Sao Paulo, computational theorists from Lagos collaborated with quantum mechanics experts from New Delhi. National boundaries had long since dissolved in the face of existential threats. Dr. Kimura, who had been studying the galactic archives, stepped forward. His earlier research on alien encounters now took on a critical importance. "Our historical data suggests that conventional approaches will fail," he said, his voice calm but laden with urgency. "We cannot fight this threat using traditional methods." A young quantum systems engineer named Lin Wei approached the central holographic display. Her fingers danced across multiple holographic interfaces, pulling up complex mathematical models and quantum probability matrices. "What if," she began, her voice cutting through the background noise, "we don't try to stop the cascade? What if we redirect it?" Silence fell. The concept was radical. Every previous civilization had attempted to resist the cosmic phenomenon directly. Humans were proposing something entirely different, not confrontation, but manipulation. Lin's model showed a complex series of quantum entanglement points, using the cascade's own destructive energy as a propulsion mechanism. It was like turning a hurricane into a precisely controlled wind tunnel. Impossible. Insane. Brilliant. You're suggesting we use the cascade's own energy against itself, General Ndlovu said, her skepticism evident. That's theoretical at best. Not theoretical, Lin responded. Probable. Look at the probability matrices. The holographic display began to shift. Probability graphs that had previously shown near-zero survival chances started to change. With each computational iteration, the chances of survival increased. Not dramatically, but incrementally. Persistently. Dr. Valdez watched in amazement. This was humanity's signature approach, not overwhelming force, but adaptive intelligence. Where other civilizations saw an unstoppable force, humans saw a problem to be solved. Military strategists, scientists, engineers began to collaborate with a speed and intensity that would have been impossible mere decades ago. National interests, personal ambitions, all of it dissolved in the face of collective survival. 12 hours into the planning, the first prototype of the quantum redirection system was taking shape. It wasn't perfect. It was a desperate, beautiful mess of human ingenuity. We might just survive this, Kimura muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The cascade approached. Humanity prepared. Not with fear, but with a dangerous, unpredictable hope. The quantum archives materialized like liquid starlight, each fragment of information a delicate ecosystem of knowledge that threatened to dissolve if examined too carelessly. Dr. Leonard Kimura worked with a precision born of desperation. The quantum cascade still approached, but now something more profound had emerged, a deeper mystery that connected humanity's current struggle with millennia of galactic history. The first decrypted file was a transmission from the Collective, an ancient civilization that had once served as mediators and historians for countless galactic cultures. Its contents were both a warning and a lament. Species categorization, anomalous, the first line read. Humanity, potential quantum catalyst. Threat level, undefined. Kimura's neural interface began to translate the complex symbology. The Collective had been tracking civilizations for millions of years, cataloging their potential, their trajectories, their ultimate fates. Most species followed predictable patterns: technological development, expansion, eventual stagnation or self-destruction. Humans were different. The archived records showed a pattern that defied all previous understanding. Where other civilizations developed linearly, humans progressed in quantum leaps. Not just technologically, but culturally, philosophically, emotionally. The Collective had observed humanity's emergence with a mixture of fascination and terror. One fragment caught Kimura's attention. A diplomatic record from nearly 3 centuries ago, buried so deep it had almost been forgotten. Observation: human capacity for radical transformation exceeds all known parameters. They do not merely adapt to environments, they reimagine them. Where other species see limitations, humans perceive challenges. Where others accept fate, humans challenge fundamental constraints of reality. The implications were staggering. The quantum cascade, the cosmic phenomenon currently threatening to consume entire star systems, was not just a random destructive force. It was a test. A crucible. And humanity, uniquely among known civilizations, might be the first to potentially survive it. Dr. Renee Valdez entered the archive chamber, her quantum interface already interfacing with the historical data. "What have you found?" she asked, her voice carried a tension that balanced between scientific curiosity and existential dread. Kimura highlighted a series of probability matrices. The Collective believed that certain species might possess a quantum potential, an ability to fundamentally alter the fabric of spacetime through sheer adaptive capacity. Humans were the first they'd ever identified with this potential. The implications hung in the air like a living thing. The quantum cascade was not just a threat. It was a selection mechanism. A way of testing which species possessed the capacity to transcend traditional limitations of existence. And humanity, with its chaotic, unpredictable nature, was being evaluated. "They're watching us," Valdez whispered. "Not to destroy us, but to see what we'll do." The archive continued to unfold its secrets. Each revelation was another piece of a cosmic puzzle that suggested humanity was far more than just another species struggling for survival. They were something else entirely. A potential key to understanding the very nature of existence itself. Outside, the quantum cascade continued its relentless approach. But now, something had changed. What was once pure terror had transformed into something else. Possibility. 12 hours before the quantum cascade would reach its critical intersection with human space, everything changed. The quantum redirection system assembled by Lin Wei and her global team of scientists was a marvel of improvised engineering, a network of quantum entanglement nodes that looked more like a fractal sculpture than a defensive mechanism. It stretched across multiple research stations, each node a delicate symphony of advanced technology and raw human determination. General Yara Ndlovu watched the preparation with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Humanity had never faced a threat like this, a cosmic phenomenon that consumed entire star systems as casually as a flame devours paper. Traditional military thinking meant nothing here. This was a battle fought with mathematics, with probability, with the kind of imaginative leap that defined human potential. 37% probability of success, Lin Wei announced, her voice steady despite the weight of those words. It was the highest survival chance they'd calculated, and it was terrifyingly low. The quantum cascade approached like a wall of absolute negation. Mathematical models showed it consuming spacetime itself, erasing entire civilizations in microseconds. No known technology had ever survived its touch. But humans were not known for accepting the impossible. Dr. Renee Valdez stood at the primary control station, her hands hovering over interfaces that translated quantum probabilities into actionable strategies. The data from the Galactic archives merged with real-time computational models, creating a dynamic map of potential outcomes. "We're missing something," she muttered, her eyes scanning countless overlapping probability matrices. Dr. Kimura approached, the holographic records of alien civilizations still flickering around him. "The collective's archive suggests that survival isn't about resistance," he said. "It's about transformation." The words hung in the air, pregnant with possibility. Suddenly, Lin Wei's computational matrix began to shift. Not gradually. Not incrementally. But with a sudden, violent reconfiguration that made the entire research station's quantum interfaces pulse with an otherworldly light. "Something's changing," she whispered. The quantum cascade was responding to their attempts at redirection. But not in any way they had predicted. Instead of simply consuming or deflecting, it was adapting. Changing its fundamental structure in response to human intervention. It was learning. General Ndlovu recognized the moment for what it was. This was more than a defensive strategy. This was first contact of the most fundamental kind, not between civilizations, but between different modes of existence. "We're communicating," Valdez realized. Not with language. With mathematical probability. The cascade began to slow. Not stop. But modify its approach. Where it had been a wall of absolute destruction, it now became something more fluid. More responsive. More alive. Humanity had done the impossible. They weren't just surviving. They were engaging with a cosmic phenomenon on a level no previous civilization had conceived. The final decision would come down to the next few moments. Would they redirect the cascade? Survive it? Or something else entirely? Outside the research station's reinforced windows, reality itself seemed to hold its breath. The moment stretched into eternity. Dr. René Valdez watched as the quantum cascade, no longer a wall of destruction, but something more fluid, more alive, began to interface with humanity's improvised redirection system. The boundary between technological intervention and something closer to communication blurred with each passing microsecond. Dr. Leonard Kimura's archival research now took on a prophetic quality. The historical records of alien encounters, once seemingly disconnected fragments, now formed a coherent narrative. Humanity was not just another species. They were a cosmic variable, unpredictable, transformative, dangerous. Lin Wei's quantum interfaces began to pulse with a rhythm that defied traditional computational logic. The cascade was no longer simply responding to human intervention. It was engaging. Negotiating. "It's not just reacting," Lin whispered, her voice barely audible over the low hum of quantum generators. "It's learning." General Yara Ndlovu understood something the scientists were only beginning to comprehend. This was more than a defensive maneuver. More than survival. This was first contact of the most fundamental kind, an interaction between fundamentally different modes of existence. The Galactic Collective's warning now made perfect sense. Humanity had always been different. Where other civilizations saw boundaries, humans saw possibilities. Where others accepted limitations, humans challenged fundamental constraints of reality. The quantum cascade began to change. Its mathematical structure, once a pure destructive algorithm, started to develop complexity. Nodes of potential began to emerge, creating pathways that had never existed before. It was as if the very fabric of spacetime was being rewritten, not through force, but through a kind of collaborative imagination. Kimura's historical archives flickered to life, showing a pattern that had been hidden in plain sight. Every major alien encounter involving humans had followed a similar trajectory. Humans didn't merely adapt to new environments, they fundamentally reimagined them. The Zrelka. The Korvax. Countless other civilizations that had encountered humanity. Each had been transformed by the encounter, whether they wanted to be or not. "We're not just surviving," Valdez murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "We're negotiating with reality itself." The quantum cascade was no longer a threat. It had become a conversation. Lin Wei's computational matrix reached a critical point. The probability models that had seemed so rigid began to dance with possibility. Survival was no longer the right word. This was something else entirely. Outside the research station, the very fabric of space seemed to breathe. General Ndlovu recognized the moment for what it was, a threshold. Humanity stood at the precipice of something unprecedented. Not conquest. Not destruction. But a fundamental reimagining of what was possible. The warning from the distant reaches of the galaxy now rang with a different tone. It wasn't a threat. It was a recognition. Humanity was coming. And nothing would remain the same. 50 years after the quantum cascade encounter, the universe looked fundamentally different. Dr. René Valdez sat in her garden, watching the sunset. Her hands, now weathered with age, still carried the muscle memory of the days when humanity stood at the brink of extinction. The quantum interfaces that had once dominated her life now seemed like relics of a distant past. The encounter had changed everything. The quantum cascade was no longer a threat. It had become a pathway, a bridge between understanding that connected different modes of existence. Humanity had not conquered the cosmic phenomenon. They had communicated with it. Transformed it. Understood it in a way no previous civilization had ever conceived. Dr. Leonard Kimura's historical archives, once a collection of fragmented alien encounters, were now a testament to human potential. The Galactic Collective, those ancient observers who had watched civilizations rise and fall, had been fundamentally altered by humanity's approach. Lin Wei, now the lead researcher at the Interstellar Collaborative Institute, had become something of a legend. Her work on quantum communication had rewritten the fundamental understanding of existence itself. Where other civilizations saw barriers, humans saw conversations waiting to happen. The warning that had once terrified the galaxy now read like a different kind of message. Not a threat, but a recognition. Humanity was dangerous. Not because of destructive potential, but because of an infinite capacity for reimagination. General Yarand Lovu, now a respected diplomat, often spoke to younger generations about those critical moments. "We didn't survive by being the strongest," she would say. "We survived by being the most adaptable. By seeing potential where others saw only limitations." The garden around Valdez was a metaphor for everything they had learned. What had once been a carefully controlled space was now a dynamic ecosystem, plants from different worlds growing together, adapting, creating something entirely new. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the transformed landscape, Valdez reflected on the journey. The quantum cascade had been more than a threat. It had been a test. A crucible that revealed the true nature of existence. Humanity's greatest strength was never about power. It was about possibility. The ability to look at the impossible and see an invitation. The courage to engage with the unknown. The wisdom to understand that every challenge is a conversation waiting to happen. She thought about the young researchers who would come after her. The generations who would continue to push boundaries, to reimagine what was possible. The galaxy had feared humanity would be a destructive force. Instead, they had become something far more dangerous. They had become agents of transformation.